Hello, friend. The mystical American Patriots Society is transmitting to you from beneath 4 million cubic feet of solid granite, in the burning heart of the Yellowstone caldera. This is a variety program for normal sandwich-eating Americans with some concerns about living in a deranged, post-Christian technocracy. So, keep your third eye on the sky and your ear to the ground, as Sumo and Smokestack connect your main brain vein to a higher plane. Are you ready? Stand by.
Sumo, my homie.
Hello. Good
I got
morning.
a question for you.
Yes.
What do you think of the idea that the coronavirus was Jeffrey Epstein's dead man switch?
I've never heard that before, but I believe it just because of how fun it sounds. That's an excellent idea.
I about 10 minutes ago read a tweet that just said that. And then I've been thinking about it for the last 10 minutes. And there are a few connections. One.
Well, yeah, go for it.
Okay, first connection. Epstein was all connected with Harvard. You know, the chair of the Harvard biology and chemistry department got arrested for basically running a Chinese spy ring.
Right.
Okay. Two, Epstein and Bill Gates were butt buddies. There's plenty of evidence of that. And Bill Gates was running that thing right before this thing broke out, like a simulation, just a hypothetical about what happens if a coronavirus takes over the world and, you know, how we can respond to it. So I think between the Bill Gates and the Harvard connection, he's kind of all up in there.
Yeah, maybe. The one thing about it is it's sort of a delayed dead man switch.
Well,
usually
did
a dead
Epstein...
man switch goes off when you die and not several months after you die.
Well, the thing had to, you know, propagate for a few months. Now, you know, what? Hang on. Let me just look up. When did Epstein die? What do you remember?
Did he die last summer? I don't remember. Everything runs together.
Or if he's really dead.
You know, he's not dead. No, he's dead. You know what we need is really, really loud mechanical keyboards so that when we type, it's like clack, 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 like old school.
I always hear my mouse clicking when I'm editing.
I want a laptop that has a CR monitor, like an old cathode ray tube monitor.
How do you make a laptop with that on it?
Well, it would be difficult, but I'm partial to CRTs. I'm very retro futurism. I don't like things getting flatter and smaller and thinner.
Sure.
I like big buttons, big clunky, allegedly portable items, you know.
I'm going to go, next time I go visit my folks, I'm going to go to my attic because we had a computer that was one of those blue and gray. You remember the blue and gray LCD screens? It was one of those, and it was a portable computer in that it was a giant box with a handle on it. It weighed about 30 pounds, and then you would detach the front of it, and that would be the keyboard, and it covered up the screen.
Yes.
And it was pretty rad. It had word processor on it.
Yeah, you could type things. You could never send it to anybody.
No, but you could compose it.
You could compose it. It was difficult to print it.
Yeah.
You definitely couldn't email it or anything.
It only worked with dot matrix printer.
It wasn't really any better than just writing it by hand, but it was fun.
You know, that's a dot matrix printer is a piece of retro tech that I would love to have.
I still have clients that use dot matrix.
Really?
Yeah.
I
still have clients that use machines that use floppy disks.
Wow.
Because not to divulge too much of my one of my professions, but one of the professions that I'm in, my clients use extremely expensive equipment.
Okay.
Let's say equipment that is like you spend a company's life savings on.
Right.
And that equipment has in some cases been bought 20 years ago. Mm-hmm. And it still hasn't paid for itself.
Right.
So they're still using it, and it's getting close to like, you know, okay, now it paid off. But so they still use all that the equipment, and there's a small army of very old men who are like really skilled in the programming language COBOL.
Yeah.
And all that. And they still go around the country and service these very, very old machines that are still in use.
Really? Okay. I know a COBOL programmer who's looking for work.
Oh yeah.
So I'll give him that tip. You can give me some more details off air about that.
Yeah, I was in a place the other day and that little screensaver came on of the flying toasters that quacked.
Yeah. The toasters, man.
I was like, I haven't seen that one in a long time, but it was still on. That computer was still in use. And I remember thinking, wow. But you know, all big facilities like the nuclear plant near where I grew up. People think that you go into a nuclear plant and it'd be all like fancy stuff.
No way, man.
No, it is the exact same thing they put in there in the 1950s or 70s, whenever probably 70s, I guess. Yeah. Whenever they put it, there's big levers, there's big like yellow knobs, there's dials with little analog needles on them and stuff.
Yeah.
Because once you build a nuclear plant, you don't mess with the nuclear plant.
Yep.
Because it could go bad. Right?
Just don't do anything.
You don't do anything. You just keep it the same. So they do only very, very surface upgrades. Like they changed the monitors, sadly. They're no longer CRTs.
Oh.
But all of the interiors, people don't realize this is probably true. Well, in fact, I know this is true. This is true of a lot of our nuclear missiles. Because again, once you build a nuclear missile and you have a big launch system, you don't really mess with it. And then it's true of satellites. When I did some work with NASA, people think all this new stuff goes up in there and these microchips. They still use vacuum tube transistors, basically. Like these old things. Yeah, because, well, for two reasons. One, to cover their butts if something goes wrong. Because they say, like, because you spend, I don't remember, let's say $50 million on a satellite. And you're like, I want to try a new part. And you put it in there and it goes up and it fails because of your dumb new part. Everyone blames you. So everyone, these type of industries are extremely conservative because no one wants to be innovative and do something new because then they get blamed on it. So they just say, well, this one worked in the last one we did, so let's just keep doing it.
Yeah.
There's that one. But then there's also these smaller components like new microchips and stuff. Very sensitive to solar radiation and that sort of thing. So the old bigger stuff was actually a little more radio resistant. Oh. So in a lot of high tech industries, you actually use very low tech, which is one of the reasons I'm retrofuturism.
I see.
Because like these really big components that they made in like the 40s and 50s when they were first starting with computers. These are like the most resistive to EM waves off nuclear bombs, to space radiation, to all that sort of stuff. Yeah, so in some sense they're more hardened, more
serviceable too. Sort of like owning an old car that you can work on yourself.
Right. Yeah, So like stuff like nuclear plants, nuclear missiles, space satellites, extremely old but high tech equipment. They all use the old stuff.
You're talking about these companies being really conservative in maybe a not very helpful way at times. And I think that most industries are fall into one of two traps. It's at one point in their history they were cutting edge, and now they're just trying to hang on to it. And when you try to hang on to be cutting edge, you end up being a fogey.
Yes.
And then and the other one is a collection funnel for government money.
Right, which is the good one to be. Which is just you just sit there and the government keeps throwing money at you for no return.
Yeah, I mean most city governments are just collection funnels for federal money.
Yes.
Most emergency rooms, basically a collection funnel for government money.
Right.
Yeah, man.
So, I don't remember how we got on this from whatever we're talking about. Well, just being Epstein's kill switch, but I agree with all of it.
Okay. Well, good, Neil. Well, I'll try to flush out that theory a little bit for next week.
Yes. Good.
Okay.
Good. What happened this week? I ran into a old friend of mine, and he had a peculiar thing going on that I thought Maps listeners should hear this. He was operating his life, unbeknownst to me until now, on a series of vows. And they made his life a lot more interesting and richer. Like, for instance, he had vowed to never again enter his home state.
Vows. I thought you said valves.
No, vows.
Okay, gotcha.
No, he had vowed never to enter his home state.
Okay.
And this was because, all his family had died and whatever. So he had no real reason to, A.
Right.
But B, as a younger fellow, he told me he had spent a lot of time trying to he grew up in Mississippi, right? Mm-hmm. And he said he spent a lot of time trying to get out of Mississippi, but he kept being dragged back to Mississippi. So one day he just said, I'm gonna go across the state border and never come back in.
Interesting. For any reason, just not gonna do it.
For any reason, I'm never gonna go back in. And he that was.
Uh-oh. We have an internet connection problem. It's not good.
Let's see. I see a picture of you. Oh, there you are.
There I am.
There you are.
Yep.
Yeah. They're oppressing us. They're trying to keep us down.
Man, they picked a weird topic to.
Bill Gates.
Yeah.
Is doing this personally. He's sitting at his computer, personally monitoring us and using hacking attacks.
He probably is that rat.
He's DDoSing us. But they were stopping me because I was in the process of channeling the spirit of Art Bell.
Mm-hmm. Wait, Art Bell is the guy with the vows?
No. I'm getting rid of that story because Bill Gates didn't want me to talk about it.
Okay, we're skipping the vow guy. Gotcha.
Yeah, no, I am.
This is going to be an interesting transition.
Art Bell is obviously the late great host of the greatest paranormal radio program ever, Coast to Coast AM.
Oh man, I loved Art Bell.
Yes, and he was fantastic, and I'm channeling him because today is Halloween episode. No, it's not really, but it is. It is. I had a good Walpurgisnacht.
Okay.
A good Walpurgisnacht. Did you have a good Walpurgisnacht?
I don't know what that is, but yeah, it was pretty good.
Yeah, and that got me thinking about Halloweeny stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And then I got to realizing that there were some saints that wore masks that were in disguise. And there's a lot of syncretism going on between religions here.
Mm-hmm.
And then I got to thinking about one of our peculiar Halloween traditions I had as a child, which I doubt is shared with anyone else. This may be like me and like 500 people. I don't know, but it was weird, and I think it's worth exploring. Okay, because we're going to pull out some deep theological truths from this.
Ooh, okay.
Some deep theological, but yeah. So, Walpurgisnacht is obviously it's May, the 1st of May. Okay. The last night of April. It's German for it's German for Walpurgis night. Saint Walpurgis. Oh, right. Okay. Saint Walpurgis. Or was it Walpurga? I don't remember. It's either Walpurga or Walpurgis was this lady. Okay. And it also means witch's night, or as they say in German, Hexenbrunnen, or witch burning night. Oh, cool. Night you burn the witches. It is. It's exactly 6 months, basically before Halloween. Okay. It's like Halloween in the summer. Oh. Halloween. It's like Christmas in July, but Halloween in May. Yeah. Right. And so everyone gets outside and they light torches, they burn they burn stuff in the fire, they bang pans, they burn people in effigy to keep away the evil spirits. Interesting. So yeah, Walpurgis, she was this lady, this English nun, and she went to Germany to convert the Anglo-Saxons in Germany. Mm-hmm. And apparently was successful, and she put a stop to a lot of pagan sorcery there. Okay. And so to this day, she's been celebrated as like, well, really what happened was that the pagans in England were like, yeah, can we just, well, I tell you what we'll do. We'll celebrate Walpurgis. And instead of Beltane, their regular holiday.
Okay.
And and they're like, and we'll all be Christian, wink, wink. And then they did all of their pagan things just under the name for Walpurgis instead of for whatever pagan deity they were about, and then danced around a maypole, and the rest is history. But I still think it's a good thing to do. I burned 2 people in effigy on Friday.
Really?
I burned, of course, Tom DeLonge, former frontman of Blink-182.
Naturally.
Well, as a way of warding off spirits of disinformation,
right?
Because he heads that To the Stars Academy USA.
Yeah.
And I think he's basically a modern Paul Benowitz from our previous show on Project Beta. I think the government is using him to distribute disinformation, and he doesn't really realize it. He thinks
poor
it's
guy.
all up. Yeah, that's what I suspect is going on with him.
Okay. Well, it worked so well the last time. They just felt like they had to spin it back up.
It worked really well.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I burned him, and I burned Luke Bryan.
Who's that?
The country music singer, to ward off continual assault of bad country music that has been produced and constantly put in my ears.
Yeah.
So I burned a couple of them, and I burned some of my old belongings.
Mm-hmm.
I danced around a maypole a bit in the backyard.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that really kept away a lot of evil spirits and is going to be very helpful for the coming year. People that don't do that, they really suffer from sorcery. Because a lot of if you ask people that are into the sorcery, they're constantly casting spells against us.
Is that why I'm fat?
That's why you're fat. That's why everyone is fat. You got to do these ancient things. But so Walpurgis, and I thought, well, then I was in a Halloweeny mood. I was like, oh, it's sort of like mid-Halloween.
Mm-hmm.
I was thinking about disguises, and then I realized, there's actually a lot of saints that went around in disguise, but not intentionally. But and this idea of syncretic religion, like the paganism being woven in with the Christianity and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
On Walpurgis night. Biggest example of this is good old Barlaam and Josaphat. Do you know the story of Barlaam and Josaphat?
No.
Well, Josaphat is basically the Buddha who was venerated as a Christian saint under a different name for like 1,000 years.
Really?
Yeah. It's a great story. Josaphat is a Latin, if I remember right, it's a Latin corruption of an Arabic rendering of the Hindi word bodhisattva.
Okay.
So it basically means the bodhisattva. They're saying bodhisattva, which is Hindi for like great teacher or whatever, what they call the Buddha.
Okay.
And the story of Josaphat is in the stories of the saints that was passed around is a 1-to-1 correlation with that of the Buddha.
Mm-hmm.
He's in the story of the Buddha. He's in his house. He's this rich king, and his father doesn't want him to see any of the ills of the world. So he builds basically this Truman Show around him.
Okay.
And he builds this giant palace, and he says he only lets young, healthy people serve him in the palace. And if you turn like 35, he makes you get out.
Mm-hmm.
And you got to bring in someone, younger and new. So his son is never aware of aging, and except growing older as a kid. No one's sick, no one hungry. There's big walls around the palace where no one, everyone inside there, all things are safe. There's no death, and he's not allowed to see any of this stuff. But eventually the kid gets a little antsy and he has to be let outside. And one of the servants lets him. And then when he's out in the city, he sees a leper, and then he sees like a man in the street dying, and he sees an old lady, and he sees the children starving, and he goes into this whole shock, like, what is this?
Yeah.
And he turns to inward meditation and is enlightened. And that's the story of the Buddha. Rejects all of his riches, for they hid from him the real truth of life, right? And he goes and lives and is a peasant. And that's also the story of Saint Josaphat. It's the same story with a little bit of Christian trappings on there. And the Josaphat story, Josaphat, it's the same thing, but the Josaphat's father, the king, he's a persecutor of Christianity, and he's told a prophecy that his son will convert to Christianity. So to keep him from being religiously minded, he does the same thing and puts all these barriers around him, so he'll never see anything suffering and he won't be drawn toward any religion, right? But then, of course, that fails for the same reasons, and Josaphat becomes a Christian when he goes out into the woods to reject his upbringing and meets a hermit named Barlaam and Josaphat. And Barlaam trains him in the ways of Jesus, and then off he goes. And this story was propagated around the Near East and the Far East and around Russia and around all of Europe for like 1,000 years. He even had feast days on the Catholic and liturgical and Orthodox calendars. Mm-hmm. But he's just the Buddha on the liturgical calendar.
So what do you... Is he still on there?
No, but they took him, in the, well, I don't know about all that. All the Orthodox have their separate little calendars and stuff.
Right.
He's no longer on the Catholic calendar. There was that time in the 70s, during Vatican II, they went through and they were like, let's take off some of these people that we're not even sure really existed.
Yep.
And they did a little bit of cleaning house. And I don't know that he was ever actually formally canonized, so that's their out. Because there were a lot of people that were never went
so they were kind of
process.
Folk saints.
Yeah, they're folk saints. There's a lot of folk saints. Like Mexico now has Saint Santa Muerte. Am I saying that right? I don't know. It's death.
Santa Muerte. Basically. Yes, that's some weird stuff right there, man. That's bad juju.
Yeah, the Mexicans love worshiping skeletons.
This is why I just don't like the whole veneration of saints at all.
It can get a little creepy. You
just end up in weird problems.
Yeah. Well, one of the things, as our readers know, I am just like if you are gay, you're allowed to talk bad about gay people. Mm-hmm. I, being Catholic, am allowed to talk bad about Catholic, and none of the trads can get mad at me. Mm-hmm. It's the rules of America. I cannot be. You cannot get mad at me for what I'm about to say. But here's the thing. One of the ways Catholics get out of these weird problems they get in is what I call paper Catholicism.
Okay.
Which is where, as long as someone didn't write it on the right piece of paper, it didn't count. So it's okay that the Buddha was venerated and prayed to for 1,000 years in Catholicism because and was on the liturgical calendar and had feast days because someone never went to the trouble of formally writing down and X is canonized and putting it on a piece of paper somewhere.
Right. The
fact that it was practiced by the whole Christian world for 1,000 years is completely irrelevant. If it wasn't on the paper. Mm-hmm. And so much, and then there's a lot of things where and then you'll find other instances where you're like, well, but this is on the paper. And they're like, but that paper isn't infallible. And you're like, well, how do you know which paper's infallible? Well, you just know which papers are infallible because they agree with the other infallible papers.
Right.
Because ipso facto, you cannot, if you're infallible, you can't disagree with a previous infallible one. And so, which one? It's this giant circle. There's a huge difference between Catholicism as exists on paper and Catholicism as exists in the world. Like folk Catholicism. Most of what everyone practices is folk Catholicism. Because I hate to break it to you, but like 98% of every Catholic has never read the Catechism.
Yeah.
And they never will. because it's written in sort of dry language and that they're not going to do.
Don't you have to get confirmed though?
No.
You don't.
Dude, they go through catechism. Like when I went through the what they call it, it's the catechesis is the process of being trained in the Catholic faith, right?
But you don't actually have to read the catechism.
No, they go through it. Like I've sat in on the. I've been through this process. What they do is they sit you down and they say, here's some of the things we believe, and it's they drag it out over like 6 months,
right? In
many places. And they'll read selections from the catechism here and there, but they don't expect you to read the whole book because that would be a big ask. They're not going to get many converts.
Well, how long is the Catholic catechism?
Oh, I mean, it's more wordy than the Bible.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, I mean, it goes on. I mean, I say that it's about equal, if nothing else. My version is about, if you hold a Bible and a catechism in your hand, they're about the same thickness with the same font size. Mm-hmm. So, they're roughly equivalent books, but
okay, that's a lot.
Yeah, and they just sit up there and they'll have various, the deacons will come by and they'll tell you their weekly spiel about the things they believe, and then the and most of them are not very well trained in theology either. Mm-hmm. So there's a lot of very questionable catechesis that goes on. Like I remember. When I was doing it, one guy, it was during the time of all the gay marriage stuff. Mm-hmm. And this one guy in the class held up his hand. He's like, hey, what about gay marriage? What do we think about that? He was Italian.
Okay.
And the deacon was just like, well, I don't, but I love them. I love the gays. We all love the gays. We love them so much. They just, but they just can't get married. And I love to hate them and I hate to love them, and I hate loving them and hate hating them, and it was just this convoluted non-answer. Yeah. And then someone else was like, "What about the Crusades?" And he was like, "Well, the Crusades," but he didn't know, as the guy asking the question wanted him to defend the Crusades because he was one of these trads that joined just because he hates Muslims, right? And he wanted the deacon to be like, yeah, Crusades were great. And of course, the Crusades are a nuanced thing that there's good and bad about them.
Not all of them were the same either.
Not all of them were the same. Yeah. And the ones where the Romans went and slaughtered the Eastern Orthodox and raped some of their nuns on the altars was pretty bad.
That's a bad
one. But the other ones weren't so bad. Yeah. And, then they're like, oh, we don't. This is where the evangelicals / fundamentalists and the Catholics always argue. Mm-hmm. Is because the Catholics, like, let's say Baptists, they'll be like, you guys worship Mary, and the Catholics are like, no, we don't worship Mary. It's right here in the paper that we don't worship Mary. But then you go to like all these like Catholic churches that are big cities. It's not so bad, right? Because they're a little more.
Sophisticated, I guess.
Well, they're a little more attuned to what's Catholically proper. But if you go out into the boonies, of America or Mexico or especially lower Latin America,
oh man,
there's some for sure Mary worship going on. I mean, there's just blatant. It's like, what? I mean, there's like all this stuff, and it's like, you're not supposed to. Mm-hmm. What they should say, the argument should go, the Baptists say, you guys worship Mary, and the Catholics would go, they don't say no, we don't. They say you're not supposed to, but a lot of them in uneducated places do.
The first step to recovery is admitting you have a problem.
Right. Is that most, like, yes, according to the catechism, you're not supposed to. Mm-hmm. But again, almost no one has read the catechism, and they just do whatever they want. They're just out there. They're just out there worshiping statues and the whole night. I've been to a thing where they had because I went. There's this lady. I forget the details, but it's the. I can never pronounce it either because it's like Bulgarian. Medjugorje sightings. There's this woman from like Eastern Europe, a couple women, and they claim to get a vision of Mary, and she claims to do it every year. Mm-hmm. She basically goes on around a Mary seeing in the sky circuit where she goes around the world to these different locations, and she says, "Oh yeah, Mary's going to show up again this year at the same time. Everyone come and pay me to get some Mary visions." Mm-hmm. And I went to one of these things, and it was me and like a good many people. I mean, thousands and thousands of these very trad in the sense that they never read the catechism, but they've been Catholic for like 20 generations.
Yeah.
Right? That sort of thing. Mm-hmm. In a field around this Mary statue, bowing down to it, touching it, looking up into the sky, waiting for Mary to appear. She did not. And then the lady came. Then the lady from Eastern Europe came out of this cottage and said, "Mary appeared to me in the cottage, and she told me that all of your religious articles are blessed. Have a good day." And then she left, and we all went. And everyone was like, "Yes, we all got blessed by Mary." And I was like, "Well, I didn't bring any religious articles, so I just said that my sandals. So my sandals, I de facto, if Medjugorje is real, then my sandals have been blessed by the Virgin herself." Oh man! And but it was weird, and there's a lot of that going on.
Yeah.
Now that's not to say, of course, on the Protestant side, that there's also a lot of weird stuff that happens.
Oh, sure. Absolutely. No, but but here's the deal, and I was Catholic curious for a little while, and they lost me because they have no mechanism to correct or even acknowledge error built into the system.
They do.
So it just Protestants, we just schism. We say nope, you guys are heretics. We're leaving, or you're leaving, and then you end up with what Protestantism has, which is a whole bunch of crazy stuff everywhere. But at least some of it is theoretically pretty orthodox. Okay,
right.
But Catholic Church doesn't have that. That's why they said we don't worship Mary, but
it does happen.
But it does happen, and it hasn't been corrected. And so I was like, well, if I got to pick a problem to have, right. I'll stick with the problem I know, I guess.
Right. Well, the way they do have a method of correcting it, and that is historically Catholicism has addressed these sorts of problems by just ignoring them until they stop and then pretending they never happened.
Okay. I stand corrected.
You ignore the fad going on that's heretical.
Yeah.
For a couple hundred years until it's no longer popular, and then you pretend like, oh no, that didn't happen, or it was for some other reason. And just like the reason they don't correct everyone is because, like, you take Latin America, you go down to Latin America. Mm-hmm. There's like the primary movers of the church in Latin America are a bunch of elderly Latino women. Mm-hmm. And they're all super into Mary.
Yeah.
To an over extent.
Yeah.
And they don't want to correct them because they're the people that actually go to the church.
Yeah.
So it's this intractable problem. But that's how you get things like worshiping Buddha for 1,000 years in the Christian churches, or let's say venerating. Now, I'm not against that because the Buddha was a pretty good guy and he had a lot of good messages. I think you can take the Buddhist thing of like you suffer because you desire, therefore don't desire as much, and like renouncing worldly possessions and all that. A lot of that you go hand in hand. You could just say, yeah, that's totally Christian.
He wasn't a dumb guy. Yeah,
no, he's a very smart guy. So I'm not against that, and I think that's a good syncretism. You could even use Bartholomew Josephat as a missionary tool. Mm-hmm. Be like, hey, almost everything you believe is fine. Just hop on in here. Maybe we should do that with we should come up with other false names for like Confucius or whatever.
Right.
And put him in there as a saint. And then later we can be like, oh yeah, just come on in. So yeah, there's that problem. Other problems, like another saint that wore a mask, being that he wasn't real, like it was because Josephat is Buddha wearing a mask. That's his Halloween mask.
I gotcha. Okay.
It was Saint Christopher.
Okay.
And Saint Christopher was super popular saint. I think he had the most artistic representations of him of any saint in England, even more than Saint George.
Wow. And
the thing about Saint Christopher is he probably A, didn't exist, and then B, he almost certainly didn't exist as often depicted, which is as a cynocephalak, meaning a man with a dog's head.
Oh, I've heard of this guy. Okay, what's the deal? What's the deal with this?
Well, I like him too because he's he's both wearing a mask and that he is either a cover for a real man that no one knows about, or he's actually wearing like a dog mask.
Okay.
or he was just part werewolf. I don't know, but the church, well, not the church, the world for a long time believed in cynocephalax, which is dog-headed people.
Okay, why?
They kept saying that they ran into them. I don't know. This is one of the weirder bits of history. I may do a show on this at some point. But the cynocephalax appear from Egypt to basically straight through to Marco Polo. Marco Polo, in his journals about his travels, said that he encountered dog-headed people on one of those islands, Andaman Islands, maybe off the coast of Vietnam.
So could it be that the expression just means something other than actual dog head on person?
Well, that's what, sometimes you can take it that way, but sometimes it seems very literal. Like Marco Polo said they were all like big mastiffs.
Weird.
I encountered this group of people and they were all dog-headed and they were like big mastiffs. And it's like, well, are they just saying, is that just like an insult? Like you're like pig-headed, like dog-headed?
Right.
Maybe. But all the Arthurian legend had Arthur fighting cynocephalax in Edinburgh.
Right.
Which you can believe if you've ever been to Edinburgh. Because no offense to our Scottish people. I have Scottish heritage.
I'm pretty sure the offense was taken.
But the Scottish people in Edinburgh are not your prime Scottish people. Well, at least they don't. Everyone comes out just looking like they had a rough night. Like you go out in the morning and everyone just looks like they were beaten last night. It is. I see why they didn't want to leave the European Union. That's all I'm saying.
Why would that? Wait, why didn't they want to leave what did that have to do with it?
I'm just saying.
Okay.
All right.
You're just saying.
And the Germans called them half hundings.
Okay.
Half dogs, half hounds. And they were in Beowulf, or not in Beowulf, but in the manuscript that contained Beowulf.
Okay.
Talk about them. One guy quoted Saint Jerome as talking about them living in the Orient and then all kinds of stuff. There was one guy. There was a theologian in the Middle Ages, or maybe early Middle Ages. I don't remember, but he wrote a letter called is basically on the dogmen to another bishop. And he said it was arguing whether or not they should be considered, a cynocephalax should be considered human and whether or not they should be preached to. And he concluded that, yes, they are human.
Oh, there you go.
I guess he had to, since one of them was a saint.
Right.
But anyway, Saint Christopher. So I don't know what to make of the dog heads. All I know is that from ancient Egypt till Marco Polo, everyone was convinced of the existence of the dog-headed people. And also of monopods.
Monopods?
That's like a little dwarf with one leg and one big foot.
I've never heard of that.
Yeah, they appear. You see all these things in the marginalia of medieval manuscripts. A lot of monopods. All these creatures that they, thought were. The Greeks called them shadefoots, and they thought they lived in Ethiopia. They call them shadefoots because they said their feet were so big, if they got hot, they'd lie on the ground and stick their foot up and just shade themselves with their foot. The monopods. So the monopods and the cynocephalax, maybe the world used to be populated by them. I have my doubts.
How do you have a butt if you only have one leg?
Good question.
Cynocephalax, okay, maybe, but monopods, I don't know that I can get there.
Monopods, you start running into anatomical troubles.
Yeah.
As if you didn't with them. But all I'm saying is one of the dog heads snuck onto the feast days.
Okay.
Right. And that's St. Christopher. Now, in some versions of the story, now in the mostly in the West, he's not a dog.
Right.
Dog man. In the East, he was a dog man. In the Byzantine Empire.
Mm-hmm.
And that's probably because they mistranslated the word Canaanite as basically canine.
Okay.
And they said they got a letter from the West, and they were talking about St. Christopher the Canaanite, and they were like, St. Christopher the Canine, and because the Latin words for Canaanite and canine are pretty similar as they are in English.
Mm-hmm.
And they said, oh, he must be, instead of being like, oh, we must have read that wrong. They're like, oh, he has a dog's head, and they started making icons of him with dog's heads. Well,
doesn't that explain the whole thing?
Well, maybe, except that I don't think that they were that. One, the cynocephaly was really believed in,
right?
And then two, at least by some people, and then two, I don't think the Byzantines were dumb. I think they were using that as a play on words.
Okay,
and they were because the story of Saint Christopher is him being like a beastly man that was converted.
Okay.
And so I think they were playing on words and being like, oh, see, he's like they're giving him a beast's head.
Right.
Right. And then after, in later depictions of him, after he's gone through his conversion, he's got a human head again. So I think the Byzantines were not stupid in doing that. I think they may have saw the similarity between canine and Canaanite.
It was symbolic, in their icons and stuff. As a teaching tool. Yeah.
I don't think the Byzantines were dumb. I think they were just making a symbolic. But anyway, you can find icons of St. Christopher still that have the dog's head. And they're pretty neat. I have a couple. But story of St. Christopher is that he was this giant of a man. Big, huge, strong. And he was in service of his king, but he thought his king wasn't strong enough for him. He said, I pledge, just like my friend who vowed never to go back to his home state, who Bill Gates stopped me from telling you about. He said, I vow to only serve the strongest king, because only the strongest king is worthy of my strength. So then he goes looking for the strongest king, and he finds this other warlord, and he follows him for a while. But then he notices he's around his warlord at some point, and someone mentions the devil. And when the guy hears the devil, he throws salt over his shoulder and does some other, superstitious things to ward off the devil. And so St. Christopher goes, but this guy's afraid of some guy called the devil. I need to go work for the devil, because obviously the devil's stronger because he's afraid of him.
Okay.
So he goes out searching for the devil, and he comes across this other band of warriors walking around. He says, I'm looking for the devil. And the guy goes, oh, I'm the devil. Serve me. And so he goes around with him for a while, looting and pillaging. And then they come to a place where there's a cross on the side of the road. And the guy calling himself the devil, he notices, goes around it. Says, well, he's scared of this thing.
Okay.
So I need to figure out, and someone tells him, that's the sign of Christ. He's like, well, I need to serve Christ because he's obviously more powerful than this devil. And so he finds a monk in the woods. You always find a monk in the woods.
Yeah.
And the monk tries to instruct him. He tells him about Jesus, and he says, Christopher's like, how can I serve Jesus? And he's like, well, you could try prayer. And Christopher's like, no, it's not really my style. You could try fasting. He's like, sort of boring. You could try giving up on women. No, don't know. He says, well, I tell you what you could do. You could use there's this river here by me, and it's a raging river, and people have to cross it to do their business, and some people drown sometimes. because it's you're big and strong. You could carry people across the river, and that will be a service to God, and Christ will be pleased because you're helping the innocent. And he was like, okay, I can do that. So he makes a little house by the river, still doing all of his drinking and womanizing, of course.
Mm-hmm.
And people come by, and he's always helping them across the river. And then one night, in the middle of the night, he hears this voice say, hello, I need help across the river. And he goes out, and there's this child, this boy. And he says, all right. Then he hops on Christopher's shoulders, and he starts carrying across the river. He gets halfway across, and the child begins to feel like lead, just heavy as everything.
Mm-hmm.
St. Christopher can barely make it across. He's like faces in the water. He's trying to hold the kid up, and he finally gets across, and he says, you almost drowned me. It felt like I was carrying the weight of the world on my shoulders. And then he says, you were, for I have carried the salvation of the world on mine, and I am Christ whom thou worship. And then he disappears. And then Christopher is fully converted in all this, and
wow,
eventually beheaded and all that sort of thing. So you can see how they would play with that idea of like he was a beastly man,
mm-hmm.
dog-headed, converted, right?
Mm-hmm.
But he still is a cynocephalak on the liturgical calendar, wearing some sort of it's a little syncretic also, talking about the syncretism, because it's a little bit, there's echoes of like Anubis in there and stuff with the cynocephalaks. So I don't know what to make of such things, other than I don't know, maybe there were dog-headed people. I don't know what Marco Polo was going on about. He just sort of throws that off in his little book about his travels. He's like, da-da-da, and then I went to China, and it was nice, and then I went down here, and over there they had some people that had dogs' heads, and then I got some silk over there, So it's just one of those throwaways. Herodotus talks about cynocephalax too.
I was recalling our conversation about relativistic space travel last night with some friends, and they said, okay, somebody shows up in a spaceship today. They look like cavemen. I don't really expect that, because we would know that when they left. We would have recorded when these people left, and then they came back thousands of years later. And then I said, well, no, because we've forgotten a lot of stuff. And I think, it's very possible that the Soviets put a breakaway civilization into space that's going to show up in 100 years or something.
Yeah.
And we would have, we could have already forgotten, or never known.
People don't even remember monopods anymore.
Yeah, or cynocephalax,
So how are you going to say you remember aliens? The government just this week did its whole, they did this last year too. I don't know why it was more, but they were like, oh yeah, UFOs are real.
Yeah. What's up with the timing on that one?
Was like, the government was like, okay, UFOs are real. And society was like, whatever.
Welcome to the party, guys.
They're like, welcome to. I saw a great meme. It was this guy sort of solemnly handing a plate to another guy.
Yeah.
And the one guy handing the plate was the government, and the other guy was society, and the plate had UFOs are real on it. Mm-hmm. And he gives it to him, and society just looks at it for a second and hurls it across the room.
Well, it's like it answered their disclosure answered nothing. It was almost like, I don't know. They it was on the to-do list to acknowledge these things, because everybody's seen these videos for like 10 years.
Yeah.
And they're like, oh, everybody's freaked out. We could do it now, and it won't be a big deal, and we won't look like a bunch of doofuses. It's like, yeah, let's just do it now.
Let's just do it now.
Yeah.
And then so there you go. All UFO bumps. Disclosure happened.
And
it
totally flopped.
It was a nothing burger. It was a flop.
Well, it didn't.
Like, for all my life, they've been like, disclosure. We need disclosure. Disclosure. And then it was like, okay, disclosure. And then whatever. People, other ufologists were like, the world would, their heads would explode. All the religions of the earth would fail. And then society would crumble because people realized we're not alone. And then people were like,
yeah,
whatever, man.
No, the UFO disclosure thing it's one of those things that's only good until it happens.
Yeah, because then it's like a letdown. It's like, oh, that's it?
Yeah.
Yep. Now, I do wonder what would happen if they went a little further. And I imagine the exact same thing would happen if they were like, Yeah, okay, we got some alien bodies at Area 51.
Yeah.
Like, whatever.
Right.
Just, the apathy of the average person
Yep.
is so great that they would not care.
No, we're all living in the future, to the point where something actually happens and it doesn't even click in our brains.
Yeah, because we're all worried about the future.
Like, and if an AI came online and was super intelligent and could predict human events or all this crazy stuff, I think nobody would care.
Yeah, I don't. Remember. Well, it's like I said in the other show. Memento Nemo Curious. Remember, nobody cares.
Yeah.
That's the guiding light of the world. Is like no one. People don't care about things.
Right.
And like if it's like 2 steps removed from their daily life.
Yep.
Nobody cares. This is why no one. If your conspiracy theory, if your plan rests upon the public quote waking up. End quote. It will never happen.
Yeah.
Because they just do not care.
They don't care. Yeah. And you can't wake them up. You cannot wake them up.
Yeah, you cannot.
You can wake yourself up, sort of. Yeah. But, yeah.
So, that was an interesting thing. Yeah, and like just like if they were like, hey, we got monopods in Area 51 too. Yep. And a cynocephalite, people are like, whatever. When's the next Lego Masters coming on TV?
Right.
I actually like that show. That was the only reality show I've watched in forever, and it was fun. Lego Masters.
I guess that's how you know your conspiracy theory was gay. Is that when it eventually becomes true and it doesn't matter. You know what I mean? If nothing changes when it's found to be true.
But see, that's the thing. I don't. Does it not matter, or just American people so brain dead and so washed with McDonald's that they just can't move? I don't know.
So for it to matter, it has to matter to one person before it matters to everybody, right? And so yes. the alien disclosure thing that the government just did, if you care about it at all, or if it even registers, it's going to register in one of a couple ways. The first way is most people are going to be, oh, that's weird, and then not even think about it again because they don't want to think about things like that or what they mean.
Right.
Okay, that's 95% of the population. So other people are going to say, totally vindicated. And then they'll realize, and then they'll realize that their life has no meaning, because it's like, well, I've been trying to get the government to admit the existence of UFOs for decades. Almost my entire life, I've been crying for this. It's happened, and now what do I do? Right.
Well, also, it's like I'm vindicated, and then they expect everyone that ridiculed them for decades to then say, "Oh, we're sorry," but really they just go, I guess.
Right.
Move on. I was like, what? It's like an orgasm without release.
Yeah.
It's like, yes, I'm right. I'm vindicated. Tell me now. Apologize. And was like, whatever, man.
Right.
It was like, what? You gotta.
Right. No, I felt that way about I was among my circle of friends. I was the guy that in January that says, hey guys, virus coming. Need to do things.
Right.
And no. And then, this, and it's weird with the virus because it's kind of been a slow motion train wreck. Mm-hmm. It's like so slow that you can't really ever get there. You can't ever really get your head around the whole thing, or it's hard to, right? Because it's just happening so slowly, it feels like. But yeah, never really felt vindicated about it.
Yeah.
Actually, I did have a couple of guys come to me and say, you were right about this, Smokestack. You were right.
Yeah.
And it didn't even feel good.
I know. It never, if you're looking for vindication from those that mock you, it will probably never come. And B,
it's not satisfying.
Will fall flat if it does.
Yeah, it total letdown.
Can't be into conspiracy. You have to be into conspiracy theories for the pure joy of it.
Yeah.
And figuring out because it leads you to philosophical and spiritual insights, and not because you're going to be proven right one day. Because even if you are, no one will care, including you.
Desiring vindication is a very like gamma male sort of trait, I think.
It's true. It's true.
And if you're in it for that, you need to
I
do
don't
some
think
soul
Alex
searching.
Jones has ever cared about vindication. That's why I like him. Because he could have been like, see, the frogs are gay. And, and everyone would be like, yeah, I guess the frogs are gay, Alex. But he never brought it up again. He was just like, look, the frogs are turning gay. Mm-hmm. I'm just telling you.
Yep.
I don't care if you believe me or not, but the frogs are gay. And
he's going to eat his neighbors. Did you see that this week?
Yeah. The poor
Pretty
Jones family.
Yeah.
But yeah, so that's true. A lot of that stuff. But anyway, yeah, back on the Halloween stuff. I was celebrating. I was burning Tom DeLonge in effigy, and as I watched his disinformation face go up into flames, because I printed off a little picture of him, put him on a little scarecrow, face on a little scarecrow, and then lit him on fire.
Right.
While dancing around the maypole.
Is this because you don't want the same fate to happen to you that his?
I don't want to be influenced by the disinformation, and I don't want to become a disinformation agent.
Okay.
So I'm warding off that spirit.
All right.
And so as I watched him go up in flames, it reminded me of things I used to do in my youth, which was, I don't know, during Halloween. So I grew up in a very sort of let's call it fundamentalist context.
Sure.
And we did this thing. Halloween was not. We did this way before the Catholics. Now, today the Catholics are like, I don't know about Halloween. You know, it's a little, I don't know, a little satanic or something. And but we were there so long ago.
Yeah.
And so, growing up, Halloween was of questionable validity for celebrating, right? And so, what we did instead at my little country church was we had a thing called a judgment house. Did you ever hear about these?
Oh yeah, these things are awesome.
We had a thing called a judgment house.
Yeah, man.
Did you ever participate?
No, I've never been to one, but the whole idea of them just makes me so happy.
Are they still around?
Oh yeah.
Okay. So anyway, a judgment house. This is something I participated in more, and I should remind you, as a child, like we're talking 8 years old to 12 years old, in that range, right? I'm in this thing. A judgment house is where it's basically a play. It's a drama where people die and some go to heaven and some go to hell. And this is used as an evangelical tool of like, don't let this happen to you. You don't want to be the person that goes to hell. Come accept Jesus and you'll be the person that goes to heaven. And these are offered on Halloween as like a Christian alternative to haunted houses. Right. You know, like these haunted house things where you go into a cornfield and some guy with a chainsaw that doesn't have the chain on it runs at you and goes, rah! You know, that sort of thing. But so this was, I if it's still going on, we were in the first waves of this. Okay. And what you would do is everyone in this drama was just a country churchgoer and not a school thespian. A. And B, it was set up for throughput. It was set up for like a haunted house. So like a haunted house, you don't sit down in a theater all at once and have the haunted house happen to you. You go through in groups, you know, like they push you through and then you go into room 1 and there's, maybe a spider jumps out at you and you go to room 2 and someone tries to rape you. You go to room 3 and there's like a Jason Freddy mask, right? And that's the haunted house. And so it's similar to that. So you would go through the church building and the church building would be set up where different rooms of the church building had different scenes. And it was a little confusing because the story is of the same characters, but the characters are played by different people in each scene. A little confusing, but it's not that hard to follow. But like, say there's a girl named Katie. Katie in scene 1 will be played by a real life girl named Julie. And then you'll walk to a different room of the church, and Katie will be played by a real life girl named Melissa. And they'll be wearing the same clothes, so you'll have a visual cue, right? Yeah, I follow. But you can follow this, but it's a little hard to follow. And the way it would always go is there would, in our community at least, so you'd have a have a story, and there'd be some people presented to you in their daily lives, maybe at school, maybe at home, maybe at work, and they would be related in some way, either friends or family members or whatever. And one of them would clearly, through the conversation and the dialogue, be a Christian, and the other would clearly be not.
Mm-hmm.
Like, they'd be like, well, I'm going to church this Sunday, and are you going to come with me? They'd ask the non-believer, and the non-believer like, no, I don't, thanks for inviting me, but I got to go shoot heroin or whatever. I can't come to church. I've got a big heroin appointment, and, it's all very overt.
Right,
like,
right.
Because you wanted it to be clear
mm-hmm.
who the characters were. Because, again, this is not very highbrow. A lot of not high culture people coming through to see this. Okay.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
You can't do heavily nuanced. So it had to be very cut and dry. It had to be very pro wrestling, really. And then we would always, and then there'd be a scene where those people would die. Right. And in our community, we would always mimic the most recent social tragedy that happened around
mm-hmm.
us.
Did you guys do it? Tell me you guys did a Columbine.
Yes, of course we did a Columbine.
Awesome. Okay.
Of course we did a school shooting.
Yeah.
So 1 year after the Columbine happened, the story centered around a family. I think it was a brother and sister in high school, and like the brother was a senior and the sister was a freshman, and then one of their friends who was also in school, mm-hmm. right? And they're going to school, and like two of them are saved, quote unquote, and one of them isn't.
Right.
And they're like, and I think he even says something like, oh, I got all the time in the world to think about God, I'm mm-hmm. And then the next scene, they're in class, and you hear this gunfire, boom, 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 and some guy marches in the door with a rifle, and he points it at him, and then the lights cut out, and you just hear gunfire, because we couldn't really shoot everybody.
Right.
And the lights cut out, and then all the people fall over, and they scream, ah! And then the lady leading you through the scenes is like, okay, next scene, let's go. It's really like really short church lady in like a bouffant hat, like, okay. And it was like, wow, that was really intense. They just had this murder of children. Of course, we did a Columbine. We also did, when a tornado swept through and killed a couple of families in a trailer park, we did people dying in a trailer park.
Okay.
Due to a tornado. We did car wrecks when there were, a big news car wreck in the
mm-hmm. news.
Mm-hmm. What else happened? We had, I think we did 1 year, we had a fire maybe. The fire didn't last. The fire didn't work very well, though, because it's hard to theatrically do flames without actually setting things on fire.
Yeah.
We did, I think we did a terrorist attack maybe. I don't, all sorts of different horrible, tragic, sudden ways that you could die.
Mm-hmm.
What happened?
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, as I said, like 9, 10, somewhere mm-hmm. in there. And I remember 1 year, one of my goals, or one of my roles, was to be in a body bag.
Mm-hmm.
And I would just lay in a field trying to look dead outside, because this scene actually took place outside. And it would be like a little bit rainy, that night. Mm-hmm. And they'd have me in a field, and I was the child that had just been killed. And I would lay in this wet plastic in the field as these people came by, and then people would come by and repeatedly zip me up in the body bag and then unzip me when the scene was over. So I had the experience as a child of being zipped up in a body bag repeatedly, just like zip, 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 zip. And it was very, that's probably why I turned out the way I did, was that sort of thing.
Yeah, maybe.
But, and I remember I had one where I was the child of the mother that died, and I was in the funeral scene, and mm-hmm. I had to like weep over her casket, and then the scene would end, and she'd sit up in the casket and eat her Skittles. And then the next crew would come in, and she'd lay back down in the casket and tuck her Skittles by her side inside the casket, and I was going, oh! And then she'd sit up again, and and I wasn't a very good actor, I can't imagine. I think I was pretty corny. But mm-hmm. Maybe I was really hitting it out of the park. I don't know. I have no frame of reference. Maybe I was fantastic.
Okay.
I don't know. I could have been a great actor. They had me do it, so maybe I was okay. But anyway, So my first memory, and this is really what, if seeing the UFO in the sky started me on the paranormal, this is what started me on the theological.
Okay.
My first memory of going to one of these things was not as someone being zipped in a body bag, or as a child being shot by a man coming in the door with an AK-47.
Mm-hmm.
But rather, I was taken by my mother to go see it.
Mm-hmm.
So we went through the church. We went through with the crowds, and I think it was a tornado year. It was a year where people died with tornadoes, and there was this family where the only two people that died was a mother and a daughter, and they were killed by the tornado. And the mother was saved, and she'd spent the previous scenes trying to convince her daughter to accept Jesus, but the daughter had not. Okay. And so she's not saved. And I remember we get to the judgment seat of God scene. Right. So everyone dies, and then you go to the scene then you go to the metaphysical scenes where you're like in heaven or whatever.
Yep.
And so we just see them die, and then we go to the funeral, and then we go to another door, and there's like, the room has been decorated in white, and like there's sort of a cloud thing on the bottom of the floor that you're walking in. There's like really bright lights, like spotlights sort of shining through. Mm-hmm. It's decked out, and there's a big throne at the end, right? A big throne. And from this throne is coming the disembodied voice of God, which is the man with the deepest voice in church speaking on a microphone on the other side.
Okay.
Right. And there's two doors set up. And beside these two doors are two angels, which are some members of the youth group, wearing white hoods, like sort of, they look like acolyte monks or whatever. Like you can't see their face because of the hood, and they're wearing these. Anyway, and on one door there's these flickers of flames in the back, and the other doors there's this soft white light. Right, so there's a hell door and a heaven door. And so we go in there, and the mother and daughter are there, and they were mother and daughter in real life, by the way.
Oh,
and
cool.
I knew this.
Okay.
I knew them. And the disembodied voice of God says to the mother, Karen, come forth. He says, I know that you snitched on everyone during the outbreak, but still, my blood of my son covers you. And and he goes through his, God goes through his God spiel, and then she's like, oh, thank you, God, thank you for saving me. And then the angels from the heaven side come, and they take her by the arm, and they start gently escorting her to the heaven side. But then the daughter's turn comes up, and she's visibly afraid, right? And she gets up there, and he's like, why should I let you into my heaven? And she starts going through all of the, the good stuff she's done, and, how she helped a little old lady across the street, and how she didn't cheat on her math test and whatever. And he's like, silence! None of that counts for anything. You are covered in sin, and depart from me, I never knew ye. And then the other angels rush forward and grab her and start dragging her, kicking and screaming, to hell.
Oh, man.
And I'm like 8. Remember?
Yeah.
8. Okay. And so, but here's the thing that gets me. All right. So they're mother and daughter in real life, and she's being dragged, kicking and screaming, into hell. And keep in mind, this is a real mother and daughter in real life and in the play. And then as she's being dragged away, she goes, Mom, help me! Tell them I'm good, Mom! And the mother, with her face with this radiant glow, turns and says, I'm sorry, Katie. I tried to warn you. It's too bad. And she walks off to heaven.
Right.
And then her daughter gets thrown into the fiery pit.
Yeah.
And she doesn't care at all.
Yeah.
And then end scene. And I remember thinking as a child, I was like, something is off about this, isn't it? Because I was like, what? I remember I went home that night and I was like, am I the only person that knows how to love? And because how could you, like, what? We're just gonna say that she was okay watching her daughter being thrown into hell.
Right.
Right. And then that started me on this whole like, well, what is this hell thing about?
Mm-hmm.
And then because I remember asking people about this afterwards, and I mean, some years afterwards when I could formulate the words, because,
right.
Like being 8 years old, I was really not. But I remember just sitting in the crowd and everyone's like nodding, like, yes, this is the right response. I'm like, that seems a little cold.
Mm-hmm.
But see, here's the thing. I sort of had this intuition. It was like, is the enjoyment of heaven predicated on the indifference to other people, including your own children being tormented by demons?
Okay.
Right? Like this is one of the major problems with hell as mostly understood.
Yeah.
It's like, okay, basically, how can heaven be heavenly if those you love are burning forever?
Right.
Okay. And there's several, if you ask people this, and I have asked, and no, the Eastern Orthodox don't have a good answer. The Catholics don't. The Protestants, nobody does.
Right.
Okay. So, but they all use the same answer. This is very interesting. All of them have the same answers, the same like gamut of answers.
Okay.
Number one, most likely, the most likely one they throw out there is like, well, in heaven we won't remember. God will. It's like a river Styx idea. You pass through the river Styx. They don't say the river Styx, obviously, but it's the same idea. And your memories of the former things that will make you sad are washed away.
Okay.
And then you can enjoy radiant God forever. And it's like, well, I don't know that I want the memories of my kids washed away, A. And then B, doesn't that make heaven a place where love goes to die? Seems a bit weird.
Yeah.
Like, why would heaven be a place where love is destroyed?
Right.
Like you love Johnny, but let's get rid of that. Right. So that really doesn't. I don't find that very convincing. And then the other ones are like, well, okay, but you will know. This is the Thomas Aquinas model. Is you will like, yes, it will be sort of, but you will know perfectly that justice is being perfectly done. And so not only will you not be sad about them burning in hell, but you will actually enjoy them burning in hell, because you will see that as a greater manifestation of God's goodness, because justice is being served. And they're like, well, that's why. And Thomas Aquinas went so far as to say that the damned are visible in their torments from heaven, and that this is a constant source of renewal and enjoyment to those in heaven.
Oof.
It's like, okay, so wait a minute. So now heaven's a place of like torture, voyeurism. Like that's not. Yeah. That doesn't seem to wash either, Thomas.
No.
And then the other ones are just like, they just say, well, we don't know. Which is the most honest answer.
Yeah.
Right. Like, I don't know. And I think you have to say that with most of these last things, like things have like, finally you have to be like, I'm not sure. But I think that this sort of idea is one of the major stumbling blocks, because hell is not popular, obviously.
Yeah. Especially
in contemporary culture, because it's like there's a lot of questions around hell that people don't have good answers for. And first of all, I believe hell exists because I've seen people there. I mean, I've seen heaven come down for a minute and like touch earth. And you have these moments of like basically perfection. Yeah. Like my first moment of perfection, I remember seeing, well, I don't know my first, but one of my most memorable was my first child. We were outside. It was a beautiful spring day. And I was sitting on the ground, and she came around to me and showed me a flower that she'd found. And she just stood there, and her head was right in front of the sun. So it was like illuminating her like a halo. And the birds were singing, and it was just this moment of absolute perfection.
Yeah.
Just like complete beauty. Her face was beautiful. The world was beautiful. I was like, okay, heaven has come down for just a minute.
Mm-hmm.
But I've also seen hell come up.
Yeah.
And I've seen people, I often say that, your soul can die before your physical body does.
Yeah.
People, that happens to people. And people just, you see these old people and they're just trapped in resentment and anger and bitterness. And they're just, you look inside and there's just no life in their eyes.
Yeah.
They're still breathing, but they're not there.
Mm-hmm.
So for sure, hell is real. And for sure, people get into it. Right?
Yeah.
But at the same time, all explanations of how that all works are sort of unsatisfactory. Like, I think one of the most common ways that people experience hell is just intense amounts of boredom. Like, because boredom is like where nothing matters.
Mm-hmm.
Like, you're not like Kierkegaard used to talk about boredom, and he'd be like, well, he's like, I lie prostrate on the floor, and what could move me? All the pleasures of the earth on one side and all the threats of pain on the other, and I have no desire to roll to either. Mm-hmm. he's just like that, because hell isn't exciting. That's the thing. People are like, I'm not party. I'd rather party with the sinners than cry with the saints. You know?
I don't think.
But hell
really
isn't
work.
exciting. Hell is a place where nothing has any meaning.
Right.
Because God is the source of meaning, and like when you go, and hell is the place where like everything. There's no direction. There's no front. There's no back. There's just nothing. There's no reason to do anything, but you're still there, and you have to experience time march slowly by as nothing matters forever.
Yeah.
Right. And that's boredom is a lack of meaning.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Boredom is where you get even like physical pain. People, I think, people deal with psychologically a lot better than they deal with being bored.
Yeah.
And I mean boredom, because the boredom is like basically it's the same as depression.
Yeah.
Like nothing matters. there's no reason to go on.
Got no telos.
There's no telos. You just that's so 100% hell is real. But like I said, at the same time, I think every explanation of hell is an example that is currently offered is an example of people letting their logic run away from their hearts. Yeah. Like Thomas, like I often say, St. Augustine was the first psychopath. Mm-hmm. And Thomas Aquinas was the second behind him. Okay. It's a little hyperbole. And then Calvin was, Calvin was like, you ain't seen nothing yet. But see, like you always have to, your faith should be reasonable, I guess, to an extent, but also you can't let that run away from like your heart. Like if you find yourself like Thomas or one of these other people saying, well, actually just one of the big parts of heaven is just like really enjoying watching people suffer. You have to be like, really? Yeah. you're like, but my logic train says that that's what must happen. And you say, well, something has gone wrong. There is
a streak of Christianity that, much like modern atheism, is overly enamored with its own having figured the world out.
Yes. And I think when you hit these certain crossroads, when you're like, you should realize that you're being absurd. Like, this is what happened to St. Augustine, and this is why I put a lot of the blame on it for him. No fault, St. Augustine. I don't want to dunk on him too much, but St. Augustine was dealing with his battles with Pelagians. Yep. Who said, like, look, actually, God's grace is, it's fine and all, but we can get to heaven on our own. We don't need any external help. We can be good enough on our own. And Augustine knew that wasn't true, and he was correct on that. And but in his battle, I think he got lost in the battle with Pelagius so much that he took up the opposite position, just sort of to contradict Pelagius, because Pelagianism was so hard. And so he went the other way, and eventually though he didn't originally, he eventually came to basically promulgate the doctrine of total depravity. Mm-hmm. It's like, no, not only can we not be saved on our own. We can't do anything good on our own at all.
Yeah.
Everything we do is just filth. And just and it's all awful. And there's no innocence in humanity at all.
Yeah.
And this is where he gets into the concept of original sin, which largely comes from St. Augustine. I know everyone's like, oh, St. Irenaeus said it beforehand. But St. Irenaeus' version was not St. Augustine's version. Yeah. St. Irenaeus was basically like people are born with a sickness.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Like humanity is broken, and when you're born, you inherit this disease, this spiritual disease that makes it difficult for you to choose the good, right?
Mm-hmm.
It was more of a medicinal model.
Right.
And St. Augustine comes along and goes, yeah, but also you inherit all the guilt.
Mm-hmm.
And then you're in this weird spot where you're like looking at babies and you're like, you filthy sinner. You filthy. I mean, Augustine, people think that's hyperbole, but this is a direct quote from Augustine.
Uh-huh.
He's talking about infants, and he's trying to convince people like, oh, they're not innocent.
Mm-hmm.
You think they're innocent. Let me tell you something. I know about the total depravity. He said, quote, I myself have seen and known an infant to be jealous, though it could not speak. It became pale and cast bitter looks on its foster brother. Can this be innocence? That when this fountain of milk is flowing fresh and abundant, one who has need should not be allowed to share it. There are the words of these are the
Yeah.
He's looking at this, he's looking at a baby who's just crying, nursing.
Right.
And he's like, see, people. Just look at the jealous bitterness on this kid's face. You know? And
that there is
away by his logic.
There is some and you can see the trajectory from there through Calvin, right? And though I don't know that a lot of I don't even really like to call myself a Calvinist, but I'm part of Reformed Protestantism that definitely carries the torch of Calvinism.
Yeah.
And I would say that there's an amount of retconning going on with total depravity right now.
Yeah.
Which I think needs to happen. And so the position, but the deal is, it's, what we've always believed is this.
Yeah.
And it's not what we have always believed, but I think it is a little bit more doctrinally sound and correct, is that, people can do good, but whatever good we do is tainted by the sin that we carry. Right. And it's not good enough to get us into heaven. It's not good. We can't do enough good to fix our soul.
Right.
Which is the way I read total depravity. And I think at least I don't know where the Catholic Church is on this.
Right.
I'd like to hear your thoughts, but I think that Reformed Protestantism is trying to fix this.
Yes, and the Catholic Church is basically in the same camp on paper,
right?
But the difference between paper and practice is often huge. But the whole original sin idea, like Augustine justifies this on, and again, this is a point of contention because the Eastern Orthodox do not teach original sin. Mm-hmm. They have ancestral sin, which is slightly different. It's more akin to that idea of sickness, right? But so Augustine justifies this idea by saying, well, people are like, well, how can I be guilty of just being born? Yeah. And he's like, well, you see, all of humanity was similarly present in Adam's testicles.
Yeah. Well, I mean, sort of.
And so, therefore, you were also present at the eating of the apple, and therefore also killed.
We sinned in the testicles.
And it's like, I don't know about that one. I mean,
yeah.
It's really hard for me I think most people would say, hey, well, look, Smokestack, I know you don't have a father because you were made from clones.
Right.
You were cloned in a vat.
Yeah.
But let's assume that you had, if it was like, Smokestack, you're actually guilty because you were in your father's testicles when he murdered a guy, and so now you're on the hook for murder.
Yeah,
and it's like, no, you weren't in your father's. You probably weren't unless he had sex close afterwards,
right?
Because as we now know, semen are recycled, right? And they go like the one that makes you isn't present at all time,
right?
Which is apparently what they thought back then. And then B, you're not really you until you also come into contact with an egg and make the whole thing, right? Because they had this idea of like the whole person was in miniature. So the whole thing really rests on weird biology that is not true. Right? The whole of Original Sin, which is still held as doctrine, rests on this weird biology of like homunculus is in the testicles ad infinitum.
Yeah.
Right? This infinite regression of people and testicles of other people, all the way to Adam.
Well, I feel like the only way the only reason that this is complicated and hard to understand is because we have this atomistic view of humanity.
Well, that's true. I can see that. Yeah.
And you know, I think it's a little more helpful to think of it as in terms of an estate. You know, you're born, you're a possessor of your father's estate. If that estate is a state of debt, you get the debt. If it's a state of riches, you get the riches. And nobody's going to complain. And had Adam never sinned and we were all counted as righteous, you know, nobody would be complaining about that. It's like, well, you didn't earn that. You didn't earn that righteousness, baby. Right. What have you done? What good have you done, little baby? Why do you get to not go to hell? You know, why do you get to live in paradise forever, you little turd? You know, nobody's going to say that. Right, but then when the estate is flipped around and we inherit an estate of debts, and it's just like, well, dude, that's just the rules.
Maybe, but it's also like, I mean, if you were like, look, this kid's dad murdered this guy, and so I have to put the baby in the electric chair. Everyone would be like, you know, like that's. I think you get to a weird spot.
I mean, yeah, but reality's kind of weird.
Maybe. I see. I think this is a place where to keep the doctrine intact, people try to accept weird positions. Yeah. Right, and it's like you just gotta be like, well, would you be okay with this happening? Right. On a small scale. And I think most people sort of their hearts would be like, no, that doesn't sound right.
Right. And we obviously we're uncomfortable with it because, you know, when you ask most Christian ministers of any stripe, does a baby that dies in the womb go to hell? Right. They're going to tell you some sort of no. I mean, you know, none of them are going to say, yeah, goes to hell, torment forever. You know, they're not going to do that. So we do have to, we cannot come off pure Calvinist total depravity. It doesn't really work.
Well, yeah, your conscience is telling you like, okay, I know your logic is saying this, but also, right. Also, Jesus said the kingdom of heaven belongs to such as these, referring to children. Yeah. You know, and then now you're like, and then you get to this, your logic train goes to St. Augustine looking at babies like you look at you.
We're not going to logic our way through this thing. Right. We're just not going to, you know. Right.
And so, So St. Augustine gets the ball rolling on this, and then people follow this logic train till eventually you're a Thomas Aquinas, and he's like, look, actually, not only are those babies burning, but you're gonna be over there like, yeah,
right,
burn.
But on the other side,
joyous.
But on the other side, you're not gonna logic. Nobody can logic their way out of the knowledge that every human heart has a problem that needs to be fixed.
Every human heart does have a problem. Yeah, exactly.
You know.
And so, yeah. And so, and then people are like, well, how, but they can't go to heaven if they're not, you know.
Yeah.
Right. And people are like, well, how can you get into heaven?
Yeah. Right. Right.
And then you get to Calvin and the whole, and Calvin does not invent total depravity. The Catholics like to put that off on him, but Augustine did it. Yeah. He just did it later in his life. And then Calvin was like, yeah, well, look, I'm just picking this up.
Right.
Right. it is Augustine's fault,
right.
and Calvin also. But it. So you get to the. I mean, look at all the absurdities that happen here. I mean, this is also, by the way, why the baptism of infants is so important to a lot of people, because they feel like the baby will go to hell if they're not baptized. You know,
and at least in my circles, no one would admit that, but but the fear is there. You know, it's there.
Right.
Yeah.
And so then you're like, well, what kind of God are we worshiping?
Right.
You know, you get into this, and I think this is now I know people are not. I know people. If I say the name David Bentley Hart,
I don't know who that is.
Those who know that is will say, he's a very intelligent man, but he's a little let's say a little lefty. But I still enjoy him. And he has a very nice bald head. He's gone bald in a way that really looks nice. I like the way. But anyway, but he would say, like, look, you know, this is his thing was, he said one time very provocatively, he was like, you know, it's no surprise that faith has fallen away when people are operating under that condition. And he said, I think maybe it's better they don't believe in any God than that, because that sort of God is frankly evil, you know? And you do get to that position where it's like, well, look, so, I mean, just look at some of this logic train that St. Augustine started that people have carried on the whole way. Just think about some of the contradictions. If it's true, then if the thing is true where the Catholics believe that you can fall into mortal sin again and go to hell, then the only reasonable thing to do is to drown all the babies in the baptismal. Yeah. Because that gets them to heaven. And everything else has a threat of them being in hell forever. Yep. And that's actually way more likely, according to a lot of them, than that you'll succeed in being a saint. Right? So what you should do is this leads you to this absurd position where you're like, well, I have to drown the infants, and I brought this up, and people are like, well, I don't do that because that would hurt my own salvation. And I'm like, well, that's pretty selfish. A, you can just go to confession later. Yeah. And then B, and I know they're like, oh, you have to, but you know,
the math doesn't work, man.
And then B, Paul was willing to go to hell if his brethren were saved. Like, where's your Jesus sacrificial spirit? Yeah. Paul was like, I would. Paul said explicitly, I would myself be cut off and accursed from Christ if I could save my brothers. Right. And so where's your Christian spirit of self-sacrifice? You know, you're just not. If what we're saying is we only don't drown babies to save our own souls, then that's a bit weird. But otherwise, we would. Like, it's the same thing as, like, if you can fall back into mortal sin again and someone has habitual sin that causes this, then when they come out of the confessional, you should just shoot them in the head. Yeah. And then they go to heaven. Yeah. And then I thought about writing a story, like it'd be a great TV show. Some very zealous person wanted to save souls went around just murdering, like just killing people as they walked out of confessional booths. Just, boom! Everyone, he's like, a soul goes to heaven, and he's yeah. Because if you actually follow the logic through, and you don't let your soul, you know, the heart stop you, that's where you would get.
Well, that's all this slap fighting that's going on Twitter, for example, between Orthodox and Catholics, and then occasionally a Protestant wanders into one of those.
Right. It's like, you know,
actually, I'm out of here. All this is just because each group has its own ways that it's tried to suss out all the logic and intellectualize theology and create this neat little math problem out of it. And they're just fighting over the different way. But all of them have some intractable problems.
Yes, that you can never get around.
You know, and that's why that and pride. Yeah. You know, a whole bunch of pride. That's why the Catholics and the Eastern Orthodox had their schism. That's why the Protestants and the Catholics had their schism. You know, that's why all these schisms happen is Christ is a person with whom you have some sort of a relationship.
Right.
Is not a theory or a math problem.
Right.
And when you try to turn Christianity into theories and math problems, you just run into issues.
Yeah. As Delicious Taco said the other day on Twitter, he said, "Is there anyone on Twitter that can promote Catholicism in an angry, clenched way?" As if that wasn't what they all do. Is there anyone here that can promote their religion to me in a very angry and upset fashion?
It is hard. It is hard to watch all the I like to refer to them as slap fighting, because nobody ever wins a slap fight.
Yeah.
They just happen, and people spectate, and then they happen again, and the outcome is never clear, right? And nothing is ever accomplished,
right?
And that's the state of the Orthodox, Catholic, Protestant three-way slap fight.
And this is why you always had to eventually just have a war about it, because well, look. Right. It's not clear who's winning this intellectual fight. Let's just stab each other.
That's a sad statement right there.
Let's just stab each other.
War is the way to resolve
God
this.
God be the victor.
Oh man!
But then, of course, if your side doesn't win, you're still not disproven wrong, even though all your side was slaughtered. It's like, well, actually, no, because I got slaughtered.
We're martyrs.
On the side of Jesus,
yeah,
and therefore, it's just like it's like
even in death.
It's like, everyone shut up.
Right.
You're all but you get into this place of total madness. Like, it's a complete upside down. The gospel stops being good news and starts becoming a threat upon children.
Yeah.
Right. And it's like, well, of course, no wonder faith is struggling.
Yeah.
Well, okay. So I want to discuss some alternatives, and not because I'm believing these alternatives, but because just if we're going to have one extreme where babies are evil suckling on the teat, and we have torture voyeurism, we can explore the other extreme.
Okay, you have a balanced presentation.
Balance them out.
Okay.
And my favorite balancer outer is George MacDonald, who was a Scottish preacher in the late 1800s to the early 1900s. And he was actually the mentor of C.S. Lewis, not in person, but C.S. Lewis read all his books.
Okay.
And C.S. Lewis said later in life, he said, "I don't think I ever wrote or said anything in which the spirit of MacDonald did not inform me."
Interesting. Okay.
Right. And he also said of him, "I never found anyone," this is C.S. Lewis talking, he said, "I've never encountered anyone throughout 2,000 years of Christendom that I felt more exemplified the spirit of Christ in both its mercy and ferocity."
It's quite an endorsement.
George MacDonald was now George MacDonald. This is why I say he doesn't get a lot of play, and also why I have to caveat him like I'm not saying this is like you got to believe this or even that I believe this. Just let's explore the exact opposite, and maybe that'll give us a counterbalance. He was a universalist. He thought that not only every person was saved, but everything was saved. Every animal, every tree, all of it would be saved. And he was he was not. People associate these sort of ideas with very sort of airy fairy gay people who are like well, actually everything's fine. And George MacDonald had no shortage of personal sufferings from which to contextualize his life. His two brothers, I mentioned the TB, the tuberculosis in the previous episode about vampirism. And he lived in the middle of the TB pandemic. His lungs suffered from it for his whole life, though he never died of it. They were damaged his whole life. Both of his brothers died. Two of his brothers, two of his stepsisters, and 4 of his children died before him. He watched 4 of his children die of this horrible disease, right? And he lived on the verge of poverty his whole life, because he felt a calling to be a preacher, and he was an itinerant preacher walking around spreading the good news, always living on a shoestring budget, was on the brink of starvation multiple times, right? He had plenty of opportunity to be bitter at the rich people, to be bitter at life, bitter at God, to be angry. He had plenty of opportunity to become that St. Augustine that sees like the evil in suckling children. But he did not. His writings are full of the most grace-filled joy that you can imagine. So he's not like this airy-fairy guy. Neither is he like everything's okay, right? But he has this view of it that manages to come off like, well, both more strict and also more merciful at the same time. Which is why he's really interesting to me, because he sort of threaded this needle in a way I don't think anyone else has. So McDonald's, if I had to say what McDonald's position sort of was, is he would say, well, look, it says in Scripture quite plainly that God's will is that all be saved and that none should perish. And he would say, well, God's will must be done. Mm-hmm. Right? We cannot. How are you going to hold that God's will not ultimately be done? And then he says, well, people are like, well, how could this be, and how can justice and mercy? And he's like, friend, you don't understand righteousness. Righteousness is giving each person what his due is. And he goes, look, it's the parable of the utmost farthing. You will pay the utmost farthing, right? And he goes, listen, you owe your neighbor your love, and you owe your friend your forgiveness, and you owe your children completely unconditional love and mercy, and you will pay it. Mm-hmm. Right? He's like, God will get that out of you. You understand? Like, everything that's owed will be paid. Right. In his thing. And he said, and you will for certain pay every forgiveness. You will for certain pay every love that you're due to pay. And so from this place, he gets to well, look, if one is owed love from another person, God will make that payment happen. Mm-hmm. Then that person will become a person that loves the other person. So I have a couple of excerpts from he wrote a book of, another one of his sufferings in life is he suffered a stroke at one point and couldn't speak. And so a lot of his sermons, he wrote this book called Unspoken Sermons, which he never preached, obviously. And one is The Last Farthing. And it's about this thing. And he had some really good quotes in there. I'm going to read just a little bit from it. It said, and imagine me with a thick Scottish accent, though I don't have one. He's talking about, first he's giving a preamble to parables. He says, there is a thing wonderful and admirable in parables, not readily grasped, but especially indicated by the Lord himself, their unintelligibility to the mere intellect. Again, addressing this look, you can't just reason this. Yeah. They are addressed to the conscience and not the intellect, to the will and not the imagination. They are strong and direct, but not definite. They are not meant to explain anything, but to rouse a man to feeling. I am not what I ought to be. I do not do the thing I do not the thing I ought to do. Many maundering interpretations may be given by the wise, with plentiful loss of labor, while the child who uses them for the necessity of walking in the one path will consistently receive light from them. The greatest obscuration of the words of the Lord, as of all true teachers, come from those who give themselves to interpret rather than to do them. Theologians have done more to hide the gospel of Christ than any of its adversaries. It was not for our understandings, but our will that Christ came. He who does that which he sees shall understand. He who is set upon understanding rather than doing shall go on stumbling and mistaking and speaking foolishness. I thought, yes. He who goes on seeking to understand rather than to do. Yeah. If you do, you will understand. If you seek to understand, you will not do. Right. Because Christ is trying to lead you in a path that you cannot intellectualize.
There's a pretty low bar of understanding in Christian faith, really. It's the doing that's the hard part.
Yes. And so he starts off this sermon getting directly to look, there's a lot of stuff going around that are driven by people trying to make sense of this. Mm-hmm. But if instead you will just do it, you will come to a greater understanding than anything. Yeah. So, and this is where he speaks to, I think he gets to a lot of, but this is where he attacks both not only the idea of hell as it is, but also the idea of heaven as it is. Because a lot of people have this idea that well, I get imparted righteousness. In Protestant circles, they'll say, well, I'm covered in sin, but Christ gives me the white garment, mm-hmm. and it covers them all. And Catholics have a similar idea, yeah, I continually do these habitual things, but at the moment I died, I had not done one recently. And so God covers me and I'm no longer able to do that. Right. And he attacks, he says, there has been much cherishing of the evil fancy, often without its taking formal shape, that there is some way of getting out of the region of strict justice. some mode of managing to escape doing all that is required of us, but there is no such escape. Any way to avoid any demand of righteousness would be infinitely worse than the road to everlasting fire, for its end would be eternal death. There is no escape. There is no heaven with a little hell in it. That I like. There's no heaven with a little hell in it. Like you can't retain any of these bits, like you can't be like, oh yeah, it's heaven and my son is burning in hell forever. Mm-hmm. Right? It doesn't, there's something about that doesn't work. There's no plan to retain this or that of the devil in our hearts or in our pockets. Satan must go out every hair and feather, right? Neither will you be delivered from the necessity of being good by being made good. There is no clothing in a robe of imputed righteousness, that poorest of legal cobwebs spun by spiritual spiders. To me, it seems like an invention of well-meaning dullness to soothe insanity. That's so good. It's a well-intentioned dullness to soothe the insanity.
I can see why you say he's very strict in his way. Yeah.
Yeah, he is complete. It's like, so he's like, Christ is our righteousness, and that righteousness is no fiction, no pretense, no imputation. There is no my sins are covered without me having to change. And he said, and this is where he talks. I think this is where he gets to the boredom aspect, like of hell. He said, I think I have seen hell from afar off, something of that final prison, the innermost cell of the universe, and I will endeavor to convey what it might be. A vast outside, ghastly dark beyond the gates of the city of God, where the evil dogs go ranging, silent as dark, for there is no sound any more than sight. The time of signs is over. Every sense has its sign, and they were all misused. There is no sense, no sign more, nothing now by means of which to believe. The man wakes from the final struggle of death in absolute loneliness, such a loneliness as is the most miserable moment of deserted childhood he never knew. Not a hint, not a shadow of anything outside his consciousness reaches him. All is dark, dark and dumb, no motion, not the breath of a wind, never a dream of change, not a scent from a far-off field, nothing to suggest being or thing besides the man himself, no sign of God anywhere. Right? And so you get to like a place of like total self-absorption.
That's almost annihilationism,
Almost, but
almost.
He never goes that far, because he says, in this darkness, you will begin having only yourself. Mm-hmm. You will begin to hate yourself because you're completely inadequate for anything. And in doing so, in beginning to hate the self, you will begin to seek for anything other that might deliver you from yourself. Mm-hmm. And then you will begin to be drawn back out again. Because he says, his thing is like, look, if righteousness is giving what is due, as mm-hmm. like the Calvinists say, like they're like, look, you were born sin, and you have this estate, and you have a debt to pay. He's like, listen, one of your debts that you got to pay is loving your neighbor as yourself. Like, it's not like it's like that. Your neighbor is actually owed that from you.
Right.
That's what he was. And your neighbor is owed your forgiveness, and he's owed your love. And, and the world is owed your reverence from, of its beauty from the Creator. And this is all owed, and you will pay that.
So is McDonald saying that hell is not a final state? It's more of like a purgatory sort of situation?
McDonald is saying, I think, that hell would be how to put it? Hell would be subsumed by heaven. That in McDonald's mind, the fire of hell is the same as the Holy Spirit.
Okay.
It is the same. He's like, when you die, there's no like two separate places. It's like you go to one room. It's like if you're at a party and there's people at the same party and there are people having fun and they're laughing. And there's the other bitter person on the couch because he was ignored or slighted. Mm-hmm. Or the man whose eyes are adjusted to the light can walk out to the sun and he's fine. But the man who's lived in the cave his whole life sees the sun and it blinds him. And he's like, his eyes hurt.
Yeah.
He's like, he said, the fire, what else is eternal besides God? Right? What else could be the consuming fire except for God himself? Right? And so he's like, otherwise you're inventing this other place that exists eternally separate from God, right?
Not necessarily.
Well, yeah, okay, not necessarily. But he said, so you get thrown into, and then the fires of hell is the conscience burning away at you.
Okay.
Right? Is like all of the things that you refuse to give and to do, all of the love you never gave, all the forgiveness. It eats away at you until you are, he would say, saved as though by fire. The golden chaff are burned away.
Mm-hmm.
So that is it's a radically different view.
Yeah.
Right. But I feel like that's a nice counterbalance to the other view. And then you think, well, okay, let's hold both of them and then see what we think.
Mm-hmm.
Because there's definitely problems with the whole, like, the scenario where the most logical thing to do is become a serial killer that kills people as they walk out of confessional. And they drown the babies. Right. And it has, torture voyeurism heaven.
Yeah.
And then the view, and then there's, and then of course, but then you have to say, well, but actually hell is real because Christ talks about it a lot.
Yeah.
Right. And then so the thing is, I don't know. Right. I'm personally a much more hopeful person than most, but, I don't think I think you have to be careful anytime you try to get to these final answers. As McDonald says, like, look, the parables, Jesus did not come to give you, he almost never gives you a straight answer because he's not speaking to your intellect.
Right.
Right. He's not trying to convert your mind first. He's converting your heart first and your mind will follow. Mm-hmm. And so I think you have to take that approach with your theology and be like, well, if I ever get to a place where I'm advocating things that I would, if anyone else did them, I would call them evil. But for some reason, if God does them, I call them some weird good thing. Right.
Right.
Then you have to re-examine and say, have I gone too far with my logic train? Mm-hmm. Because there's a lot of weird things, like people get to like, well, we could do a whole show on theodicy and like the problem of pain and suffering. But like John Piper, a pox upon his house.
Not a Piper fan?
No. Well, he was like, I remember these tornadoes went through not long ago, it was a long time ago, but anyway, he was like, and he said, it's the fingers of Christ being dragged across the surface of the earth. What? Just kill it. Like he said, he kind of described them as just killing the people, because Piper believes every single thing that ever happens is directly a result of God's direct control. Okay. And so if God is making the tornadoes go across, it's because he wants to, because those people need to die now, and that's for his glory. Mm-hmm. Right? And everything that God is only concerned about his own glory. For some reason, this is the weird thing about Calvinism, is God is only concerned about his own glory. But why is he concerned about proving that to people that he just made?
Yeah, I don't think that Calvinism really asserts.
That's not Calvin. That's John Piper.
Right. Okay. I mean, there is a right to glory that God holds. Right. But that's not his only concern. Otherwise, we would have just been annihilated upon any rebellion, and in a glorious, glorious fire.
Right. And and I think Christ's love, and one of the things Saint Syriac the Elder said was like, look, if you want to, or Saint Syriac Saint Isaac the Syrian rather, Saint Isaac the Syrian said, he's like, look, if you want to really see God, what you got to do is you got to love everything, and I mean everything. Like you gotta, he's like, you gotta even ask pardon of the birds. He's like, you got to love the trees. You have to love the rays of sunshine. You have to love the flies. You have to have this expansive love that just flows out from you in charity for everything. Mm-hmm. And then you will begin to see present right now the Eden as it was. And that will begin to be made clear to you. And it will come out like when Christ says the kingdom of heaven is at hand. He's like, it's right here, right now. The thing that prevents you from experiencing it is you. Right. And when you begin to do that, the world changes shape and it changes form. And a lot of these questions start to go away because you're actually not even looking at the same world.
Mm-hmm.
You're looking at a different world. There's two worlds existing side by side. One is the creation as it was meant to be, and the other is the creation that has been fallen under the principles and powers.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think when you like that's the proper lens to view what Christ is about. Because I mean, John comes out and says God is love, right? That's his primary concern. The primary concern is not necessarily his glory, except insofar as that is an expression of love, right?
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, just some different back and forth. Like David Bentley Hart is a big universalist. He's an Eastern Orthodox person.
Mm-hmm.
He has a nice bald head. He writes very pompously. I will say that. I shouldn't say that. I don't know if he writes to show off his intellect,
mm-hmm.
or if he writes just to have fun with language. Because a lot of people like to use words just because they're fun.
Sure.
Right?
Yeah.
I don't know if it's that, but you do read his books, and it's like there's no reason to have 2 words per sentence that most people would have to look up in a dictionary.
Right.
Right. Like I get most of them. I have a pretty high vocabulary, but still he's like, just say happiness or joy. You don't have to say felicity. I get it. It's fun. I mean, it's fun to use words. I mean, so he might just be really, he does speak Hebrew and stuff. He probably just enjoys language. I'm not going to assume that he just wants to be pompous.
I question, when somebody writes like that, I question their motive for writing.
I do too. But and so I will say he comes off, whether he is or not, as a little pompous.
Just be a poet. You can do that with poetry.
You can do that with poetry.
But if you're really trying to teach somebody true Christian doctrine, tell it to them in a way they can understand.
Right. Yeah. And so, and he makes a lot of good points. I enjoy him. I know a lot of people are like, David Bentley Hart, he's got a bald head. There's never, since television started,
mm-hmm.
the U.S. has not elected a bald president.
Yeah, it's really it's hard for bald guys out there.
But beforehand, there's a lot of bald presidents.
Mm-hmm.
Just like I'm not sure about this, but I think ever since television, the tallest candidate has won every time.
Maybe that's part of Trump's sauce, and that's why he's so into his hairstyle, because I think he is going bald. But
he's almost 80, so it would be unusual if he wasn't going bald.
Right.
By that point.
His hair is so carefully maintained because he knows, and this is the thing that he would know, bald man can't get elected.
Yeah. Well, yeah. And that's why Joe Biden has that hair comb over also.
Right.
Like they all do that. I mean,
it's also why he will lose, because he's bald.
Yes, that is why Bernie Sanders never had a real chance.
Yeah.
I'm sorry to say.
The hair. It was the hair.
He's short and he's bald.
Yeah. Can't
the tallest guy has won every time.
He should have been a pastor or something.
Yeah, and he's always had to have hair. And John, Kennedy won because he looked good.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. It really is just a contest of looks. And David Bentley Hart, though, he pulls off the bald thing really nicely. He balances it with a nice beard. A lot of bald guys they'll go bald and then they'll say, well, I'll just grow hair on my face instead.
Yeah.
And they just grow really
Which I feel like that works.
I feel like that does work too. I'm not sure. We should investigate the biology behind balding.
It still counts as a human head if it's upside down.
Right.
And the hair is on the bottom.
Yeah. Yeah. So David Bentley, I have nothing against him other than don't use words like felicity when happening. But to his own felicity. Now he did do a whole translation of the Bible himself.
Mm-hmm.
Because he speaks ancient Greek and ancient Hebrew.
I mean, that's impressive.
It's very impressive.
But I'll have to confess, I feel like universalism is sort of a popularity contest.
Sometimes it can be. Yeah.
maybe not everybody that holds those views is, but it's just not scriptural basis for a lot of that. You have to throw out a lot of doctrine to really stick to that.
Well, you have to throw out some. I think you have to. I mean, there's.
You pretty much have to throw out the gospel to be a universalist.
I don't know about
at the end of the day. I don't know. Maybe that's up for another discussion, but that's the way I feel about it.
I mean, as in Adam all died, as in Christ all shall be made alive.
Mm-hmm. I mean,
there's no, God is not willing that any should perish, but that all should come to eternal life. And again, I'm just saying you have to balance this so you don't go too far.
Yeah. Well, it's like I think over intellectualizing your theology is sort of like trying to eminentize the eschaton as who said that? Was that Kirk or
that was McKenna?
Okay. No, he didn't say McKenna didn't say that. It was some conservative dude.
He said it first.
He said don't try to eminentize the eschaton. But no, it's the same basic problem is don't try to make earthly things that are heavenly.
Yeah. And yeah, and maybe a lot of this is just maybe a lot of this is just like Confucius hiding behind a saint's name. I don't know, because I do wonder about that. Ever since I've learned about Barlam and Josaphat, I've been like, there's all these saints teaching that people are like, well, Saint Irenaeus said, and like, are we sure Irenaeus wasn't just Confucius or something? I don't think Irenaeus was, but I just use him as an example. Like, are you sure that this particular saint wasn't just some other guy?
You're not gonna get me sneaking on all these Eastern guys into the church. I'm not gonna fall for that.
Like Shiva? Is that Shiva?
Yeah. It's like, well, what about eternal return? What come on. It's like, give me a break. Give me a break, Sumo.
Is Saint Daniel actually Shiva? Is that who that is? I don't know.
Yeah.
He doesn't have a dog's head though. But yes. So anyway, that was my Walpurgis Nacht meditations.
That was an interesting conversation.
I think we have to everyone go burn an effigy of Tom DeLonge. That's one thing that you should.
Is that the takeaway? Is that the action item for this?
Yeah, burn an effigy of Tom DeLonge. It's still close enough to May Day that you can get away with it.
Okay, our next show is gonna have to be really practical to kind of balance out this one that was highly ethereal.
I mean, this was pretty practical.
Okay.
There's a lot of action items here.
It comes from China.
Hamburger, bang, bang!